This is Point Counterpoint, and now our host, Whitney Barnes.
Trapped, left behind. Think about that for a minute. I want you to envision yourself trapped in a contrived system that promises opportunity and then hinders any chance of progress. Have you ever noticed the different types of homeless that are wandering throughout our community? Or are you aware of the youth in our foster care system who, once they've reached the age limit for support, try to embed themselves into society just to find themselves homeless again? These disconcerting issues are our topics on tonight's episode of Point Counterpoint. Good evening and welcome to Point Counterpoint. Tonight we're going to be discussing the very many facets of homelessness and the youth in our foster care system with our guests, Dr. Adrienne Winfield, who is Professor of Political Science at Humboldt State University and author of the book Little Cities, Big Challenges, the Issues Facing Rural America, and Michelle Gaudry, who is director of the homeless shelter here in Arcata, California. Thank you both for joining us. Welcome to tonight's program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So let's get started. I'm understanding that there are many types of people in the homeless community, and I want to understand who these people are so that I can begin to understand their situation. So let's start. Adrienne, you want to start off?
Sure. What I see when I drive past the Bayshore Mall and Arcata Plaza are people who are possibly mentally ill. I see substance abusers, trimmers, transients, and quite frankly, I see people that are homeless by choice.
And what do you see, Michelle?
I see people. I see people who have lost their shelter. I see people who have been marginalized by society. I see foster care children and possible runaways. I see drug addiction, but I believe there's a better option for these homeless people.
Well, Adrienne, you did mention the Bayshore Mall. Where are these people supposed to go once their shelters are totally obliterated?
Well, people should understand that the encroachment of the homeless on areas like the Bayshore Mall, it's not only bad for business, it's unappealing to the city in general. Now, I don't support the relocations, but there just isn't enough room for all these people in our little county.
These spaces are the only shelters these people have. Many are transients who are not capable of reaching a family member or friend for aid. They may have been ostracized by their family and friends.
Again, I'm not trying to justify the forceful relocations. I'm merely giving my reasonable counter to this issue. There have been recent instances in which people in these areas, including the homeless, have been injured. And like Councilmember Melinda Cherubellini said, if we don't enforce camping laws, that's a liability. And if we don't prosecute people, that's a liability.
All right, it's a problem. Do you have a solution, Michelle?
The Humboldt County Board of Supervisors should discuss a consolidated plan with State Senator Mike McGuire to receive additional grant money for the building of more shelters.
I agree, and Humboldt County has received large amounts of grant money before for this very same issue. The problem is the way those grants have been implemented. We need to convince the various mentally ill, substance addicted, and transient homeless population to actually utilize the resources.
Some homeless people may or may not qualify for these benefits, but I am much more intrigued to learn how they became homeless. Once we find the source, then we can come up with an answer.
Well, that's a good point. Tell me more about that.
Of course. You are aware that 25% of the county's homeless population was in the foster care system at some point in their lives. Now, what this information means to me is that homelessness is rooted into more than just mental illness.
Well, where do you believe that homelessness is rooted from then?
I believe that homelessness is rooted from personal conflicts. 50% of youth reported intense conflict or physical harm induced by a family member as their major contributing factor for becoming homeless. Approximately 300,000 foster care children make up that 50%.
Do you have comments on that?
I personally believe that the problem of homelessness derives more from major cutbacks in the workforce than it does from many personal issues. And those cutbacks have affected not only the economy, but also education.
Well, we will be discussing foster care when we return to Point Counterpoint. Please stay with us. Good evening. Welcome again to Point Counterpoint. Thank you for coming back to join us. Tonight we are talking about homelessness and the foster care system with our guests, Dr. Adrienne Winfield and Michelle Gaudry. Before the commercial break, I mentioned the foster care system, and I have a really disturbing factoid here. In the United States today, nearly 400,000 children are living without permanent families within the foster care system. Over 100,000 of these children are eligible for adoption, but a third are going to wait for over 3 years before being adopted. Michelle, comments on that?
Less than 35% of children in the foster care system ever get reunited with their families, and even fewer get adopted. Now, how can these citizens without parents succeed as they transition into the real world when they don't even have the proper support and stability?
Yep. Where would it come from? Do you have ideas on that?
Whitney, something worth pointing out is that children in the foster care system face an uphill battle. Only 45% of foster care children graduate from high school compared to the average 70% for all other students. So it's very important to have mentors and support programs in high school and in college for foster care children to reach their educational goals.
Well, this is something we actually agree on. I think a limited education is a big part of homelessness. And I think helping foster kids get a better education is really important in preventing homelessness. But I think the organizations to do that and the governmental grants are already there. They just need to be managed better. And here's an example of what I'm talking about. 2 years ago, the Department of Health and Human Services received approval for a state grant of $720,000 to provide services for teens age 14 and up in Humboldt County. So the money is there. We just need a better system.
How can we improve that system then? What do you think?
Well, right now, the process of funding foster care programs works in a sort of pyramid scheme where we've got the federal government giving funds to the states, then we've got the states giving funds to the local programs. We need to develop a system where all of the money comes from one source.
So, Adrienne, what exactly are you proposing then?
I'm saying we need to focus on one situation at a time. Let's develop a beneficial plan of action for a Eureka Arcata Town Committee that would prompt the construction of foster care buildings, shelters, apartments, and homes. This would not only bring in money for the city, it would also create new job opportunities and living options.
That's a very good proposition. The only problem with that is that it could take a long time for something like this to happen. We need immediate action if we are going to end the encampments like the one behind the Bayshore Mall.
Yes, it could take a little bit of time, but as a community, we need to take a step back and look at the problems within it. I'm sorry, I don't think there's a way for everybody to be satisfied. We've got to come up with a compromise.
But compromise is so difficult when it's human lives, is what we're talking about. Thoughts on that?
Well, I agree that this community needs to start discussing the problems of foster care system and homelessness, and I believe that they are rooted in the values of modern society. There just isn't enough time or energy to help these people in need, and quite personally, I find it sad.
Yes, and we have just enough time for closing comments. So, Adrienne, do you want to start?
We need to make some minor improvements to the system, such as streamlining the funding of services. But the bottom line here is that homeless people need to want to help themselves. And if they don't want to do that, we as taxpayers are not responsible.
All right. Michelle?
Well, I agree with Adrian's overall plan to help out the homeless community. And since they are a part of this community, we need to help them get back on their feet. We need to take immediate action now.
Okay, thank you. And thank you both for joining us on tonight's program. Yes, we have problems in our society due to the unwillingness to make necessary changes. We are connected by one system and can't afford to ignore this mess any longer. In closing, I have one more quote or a statistic I'd like to give you. Today there are 18.6 million vacant homes in our country, 18.6 million. And yet there are about 3.5 million people who are homeless. Think about that. And until next time, thank you for joining us. Good night and be well.